Hello everyone, I'm Professor Plink. I respond to various theological and ideological questions and claims from a rationalistic and naturalistic approach in an effort to give and explain the opposite viewpoint and help to balance the conversation. Before we get into today's video, special shout out to my most recent super thankers, Milo Van Loon 5106, Piao Miao Noir in a Waifu Car, Taylor Hudson 5315, BS Not Accepted, Fred Zerez 7875, and Martha V 4654. Thank you for your kind support of my channel. You are the critical thinking queso cheese on my secular chicken chimichanga. Thank you very much for helping me to continue to do what I do. And if you like what you see in this video and would like to help out the channel, make sure to subscribe and click the bell so you'll always be notified when new content comes out. And of course, like the video and maybe go down and pop in a comment. All of that really does go a long way towards pleasing Algorithmo, the YouTube algorithm, and keeping my channel motoring along. Now on to today's video. Today we're going to be looking at a video from Brian Holdsworth, who's going to be talking about what he feels is the worst atheist argument. Now, technically speaking, there aren't actually a lot of atheist arguments, because we atheists aren't trying to prove anything most of the time. We don't have a specific thesis that we're claiming and trying to convince others of. Most of what constitutes atheist arguments would be more accurately described as debunks of religious arguments. Atheists generally are arguing to disprove something rather than try to prove something. Now, there are hard atheists who insist that there is no God and attempt to make arguments for that claim, but it's far more common in my experience for atheists to be reacting to theistic arguments and showing them as fallacious or unsound. But perhaps I'm just splitting hairs here. Whether you call them debunks, refutations, contradictions, disproofs, or arguments, we do certainly go round and round with the theists, rhetorically speaking. And Brian has issues with at least one of those arguments. So let's dive in and hear what he's got to say. Oh, this is one of those sit down, let's rap conversation videos, huh? Okay, well, we can do that. Let me just slide over my chair here. There we go. All comfy cozy. But, question for you. What's the deal with videos that do this? I mean, you can edit the whole sitting down after hitting the record button on your camera bit, can't you? Why are you leaving it in? Is it to imply that you're having a little intervention with the atheists in the audience? A bit of a come to Jesus meeting, if you will?
If I was going to evaluate the various arguments that are present in today's popular conversations, and I wanted to tease out the worst ones, I would probably consider some combination of how fallacious it is and how popular it is. If it's really egregious and clearly wrong, and also very popular, then it's probably a contender for one of the worst arguments. And I would say that this one ranks up there.
And also, the Latin chanting in the background. It just gives off creepy vibes. Even when I was a churchgoer, this was always something that didn't sit well with me. Going into a church and sitting down in a pew as the choir's Latin gibberish that not only did I and the rest of the congregation not understand, but I was fairly certain the choir themselves didn't understand and only learned to sing phonetically. It rang out through the building. Just creepy stuff. And you use it to underpin your rhetoric. Well, anyway, so you've started off giving us your criteria for what constitutes a really bad or a potentially worst argument. It has to be 1, fallacious, 2, very popular, and 3, clearly wrong/egregious. So we're going to be examining this supposed worst argument for atheism for these 3 traits. So let's have it, Brian.
I see it a lot in the comments on my videos, and there are quite a few popular atheists who like to repeat it. Ricky Gervais famously uses it whenever he gets the chance to exfoliate his atheism in front of an audience. And Richard Dawkins used it in The God Delusion, and this is probably the origin of it. In it, he said, "We are all atheists about most of the gods that humanity has ever believed in. Some of us just go one god further." And it's very effective in something like a late night TV exchange. For one, it's succinct, and for another, it's quite clever. So it brings the appearance of being logical.
So basically, you believe in, you deny one less God than I do. You don't believe in 2,999 gods, and I don't believe in just one more.
Right.
Okay, so this is the supposed worst atheist argument. That we're all atheists about most gods, we just go one god more. So my first problem with you claiming that this is the worst atheistic argument is that this isn't even really an argument at all. This is not said to try to convince you that there is no God. This is really just a quip to be like, as you said, succinct and a bit of a clever turn of phrase. But mostly, it's used to address the incredulity that a lot of theists have when they interact with an atheist and just can't seem to wrap their heads around someone not believing in a God at all. I mean, let's go back to Ricky Gervais to see how this phrase typically comes up when an atheist and a theist converse.
How can you not believe in God?
Which one?
What do you mean?
Well, Zeus, or Ra, or Ganesh,
No, not those ones. The real one in the Bible.
Yahweh.
Just God.
Well, you know how you don't believe in all those other gods I mentioned? That's how I don't believe in yours.
Do you see what I mean? He wasn't trying to convince her that God doesn't exist. He was addressing her incredulity at the idea that he didn't believe in the God that she believed in. It could be said as an attempt to get a religious person to think about the reason for their attachment to their presumed deity and their religious affiliation. Because if one thinks about all the people who have historically and currently believed in other gods just as fervently as they believe in their own, it might cause them to examine that their geographically and culturally imposed religion may not have been as freely chosen by them as they think. But either way, it's not really an argument for not believing in God at all. So, what is it exactly that you have against this line of thinking, Brian?
From the perspective of a theist like me, it's quite difficult to respond to because it's so short and witty that people expect an equally short and witty reply. But instead, we find ourselves trying to do this whole educational exposition of why it's fallacious.
Dude, that's fine. Here on this channel, I regularly respond to 2 to 5 minute videos with a 25-minute reply, going into highly pedantic detail about every little thing the person that I'm responding to has said or even indirectly implied. So feel free to get as verbose as you like, so long as you're making substantive points about the flaws in this phrase and argument. So let's go. Let's get into it.
The truth is, it's a non sequitur in the highest degree, and that's being generous. It simply doesn't follow that because you believe in one less God than I do, that I'm practically an atheist too. It also doesn't follow that God doesn't exist, or that atheism is true, or that theism is false.
I know, you're right, which is what goes back to what I was just talking about earlier, that this isn't really an atheist argument against God. This is not an attempt to convince you or any theist that their theistic belief is false. That was never the point of it. The point of it is to get people to see past their theistic bubble. There are lots of people who have been so insulated within a religious community or subculture that the very thought of an atheist is anathema to them.
I mean, but what is an atheist? I don't really get into that. You know, when I've talked to people all the time, I'm an atheist. I just walk away. I don't know what to say to you. You know,
well, an atheist is someone who doesn't quite believe that there is somebody out there, some God out there.
Well, then to me, you're an idiot.
So that is what this statement is attempting to confront. That not believing in a God is not all that far removed from what any theist does, as there are literally thousands of gods that they don't believe in. We atheists just go one God further. Now, that's not so strange, is it?
But because it's so common and so popular and often repeated, it does require a reply. So if we as theists need to reply to it in a succinct way, I think the best way would be to come at it by way of an analogy. If it's valid to claim that since a person like myself rejects the majority of claims about God or divinity, then I might as well reject all claims about God or divinity.
That's not what we're saying, nor is that the point of the argument.
Then the following analogy would also be true. Let's say I'm a math denier. I deny all math as invalid from the beginning. And to try to persuade you in that, I ask you, 1 plus 1 is 2, right? Which of course you would say, yeah, of course. And I would say, 1 plus 1 isn't 3, it's not 4, it's not 5, or any of the other seemingly unlimited replies you could give as a solution to that problem. So when you say that 1 plus 1 equals 2 and not any of the other possible answers, you're saying that you reject the innumerable alternative options. Well, I just go one step further and deny 1 plus 1 equals 2. And since it's just one more step of denial, you might as well deny that too, and thereby deny all of math.
So, Brian, that was a false analogy fallacy. You started off saying that you look out for fallacies in arguments when you're looking for the worst ones. Well, you should be equally on the lookout for fallacies in your own arguments. So that was a weak analogy fallacy. When an analogy is used to prove or disprove an argument, but the analogy is too dissimilar to be effective, that is, it is unlike the argument more than it is like the argument. See, you can't compare theistic belief to math, because with math, there is going to be a right answer. 2 plus 2 has to equal something. So some answer has to be correct. For this to be a sound analogy to theistic belief, there would have to be some God that would have to exist. So 2 plus 2 may not equal 5, it may not equal 12, it may not equal 22, but it has to equal something. That's like saying Zeus may not exist, Kali may not exist, Ganesha may not exist, but some God has to exist. But that isn't necessarily true. It is entirely possible that no God exists, whereas it isn't possible that 2 plus 2 has no answer. So in this analogy, you're assuming and presupposing the necessary existence of some God. And you can't rationally do that, despite what presuppositionalists would have you believe.
So that original argument is like telling a married man that he's practically a bachelor because he rejected every other woman except for one. The only difference between him and a real bachelor is that a real bachelor just goes one step further.
Well, if your married friend reacted with incredulity at the idea that you wanted to stay single and couldn't wrap their mind around the idea of not getting married at all, that line of thinking might work in showing them that choosing not to marry any woman was not so far removed from choosing not to marry any woman except one. But that single person certainly wouldn't be trying to convince their married friend to get divorced with this line of thinking. So again, you're misunderstanding the point of the argument, Brian. It's not to convince the other person to stop doing what they're doing or believing what they're believing. It's meant to convey that our lack of belief is not that weird.
The other problem with this argument is that it seems to suffer from a false equivalency, which is common in a world that likes to compare all religions as if they're making claims about the same fundamental parameters. So as many atheists insist, rejecting the existence of Thor or Odin or Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy is no different from rejecting the existence of the God of the Bible. But this betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is that Christians and Jews claim about God, which is that God isn't some higher being within the universe. As Bishop Barron often says, God isn't one being among many within the universe. He is being itself.
So this accusation of the argument being fallacious is itself a fallacy. Well, two fallacies, actually. Brian, you're employing both a straw man fallacy as well as a special pleading fallacy. So straw man, as is common knowledge, is substituting a person's actual position or argument with a distorted, exaggerated, or misrepresented version of the position or argument. Nowhere in either Dawkins or Gervais's statements did they say anything about Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy. They were talking about all the other gods that humanity has ever worshipped. All of them, collectively. Now, some of those god beliefs certainly did revolve around earthbound deities. But certainly there have been other non-Abrahamic god concepts that were just as omnipresent or omnipotent as Yahweh.
Yeah, my God is greater.
From laughs with your four winds. Laughs from his mountain.
My God is stronger. He is the everlasting sky. Your God lives underneath him.
Shiva, Hanulnim, Hypsistos are just a few examples of non-Abrahamic gods that have been worshipped throughout history, thought of as omnipotent and omniscient. Beings who were, in effect, existence itself. So, to restrict what Gervais was talking about down to some of the lowest level, but most culturally popular polytheistic gods like Zeus or Thor, is to strawman the argument entirely. No one restricted it down to only those gods who lived on a mountain and had bodies and got the crap kicked out of them by a Spartan covered in the ashes of his dead family. And then, you're also employing a special pleading fallacy. You're applying standards, principles, and/or rules to other people or circumstances, while making oneself or certain circumstances exempt from the same critical criteria without proving adequate justification. Special pleading is often a result of strong emotional beliefs that interfere with reason. You are putting your Christian God above all other God beliefs simply for no other reason than because you've been told all your life that your God is above all other gods. So, to your mind, any attempt to compare him, your God, or equate belief in him to any other god is going to seem like a false equivalency, like trying to compare a firecracker to an atom bomb. But it's just your special pleading that is causing you to insist on your God being the atom bomb to every other god's firecracker. And Brian spends the next 3 minutes just going over and over this one point, insisting that Christianity and the Christian God is so monumentally superior to every other god and god concept that they aren't even close to being comparable, which ultimately ends up being his final point. So then, to go back to his 3 criteria for a bad and potentially worst argument, first, it must be fallacious. Well, Brian's attempt to position this argument as fallacious fell flat, utilizing weak analogies, strawman reasoning, and special pleading to attempt to make his case. The only fallacy he claimed this atheistic argument made was a false equivalency, which the argument doesn't make because Yahweh doesn't get special status over and above all other God beliefs ever, just because Christianity says so. As for the second criteria, the claim that this argument is popular. Well, it is a line that I have heard from time to time, but I would hesitate to say that it's one of the more common arguments that atheists make. I mean, as I started off saying, it's barely an argument at all, more of a quip. It's easily the kind of thing that can be trotted out on a Stephen Colbert show where you're really dealing with only a 5-minute or so informal chat, primarily meant to be entertaining to the audience. But I've never actually heard this used in an actual debate or a real substantive argument against theistic belief. There are far more popular and often used atheistic talking points, like the problem of evil, God of the gaps, religious belief being highly the result of indoctrination, proven inaccuracies of holy texts, failed prophecies, debunked miracles, scientific explanations undermining religious orthodoxy, etc. I would say that there are tons of more popular places for atheists to speak from than this line about going one God further. And then thirdly, being egregiously wrong. Well, it's not wrong, is it? What about the statement is in any way false? You do lack a belief in every other god that has ever been worshipped. And we atheists do just go one god further. So it's not at all wrong in what it says. But even if you try to claim it as being wrong as a tool for arguing against the existence of God, well, that is a wrong attribution of the argument. It, again, isn't an argument against belief in God. It's an argument against theistic incredulity of the atheistic position. So it's not wrong in that respect at all. Basically, this entire video you made could have been avoided if you had taken the time to understand what any atheist who says this is trying to do with the statement. Basically, to get you to stop putting your own God on such a high pedestal that you can't fathom not worshiping it. And in an attempt to argue against that, you put your God on such a high pedestal that you couldn't even fathom comparing him to other gods. Way to miss the point entirely, Brian. So that is where we'll leave things for today. So thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like this video, comment, and subscribe so you'll always be notified when new videos come out. Until next time, I'm Professor Plink, reminding you to keep striving for greater understanding. It's the best way to get wherever you want to go.